Our speaker tonight was born in England, immigrated to Canada when he was 9 with his family, got his elementary and secondary education in Vancouver, and then went to the University of BC for his Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and a teaching certificate. He taught for 30 years in the cusp and 2 years overseas, one in Australia and one in Queensland and Tasmania. He's worked on several biological contracts and is currently monitoring waterfowl out of Burton Ponds, a project by BC Hydro's wetland restoration work. I found it interesting that I heard that he winters in Texas, Gary does, but I had not realized that he has traveled literally in 15 different countries around the world, and birding in all of them. That includes Australia, New Zealand, Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, Namibia, Peru, Panama, Costa Rica, Mexico, Belize, Thailand, Taiwan, Japan, and the United Kingdom. So if you want to travel, it sounds like he's your contact to find out how to do it. Thank you. Go ahead, Gary.
As I started to say, I decided very quickly that I was not going to focus just on rare birds of the Kootenays that I had seen, but that wasn't really fair. And you were probably more interested in knowing about rare birds than you were about knowing what I'd seen. So I changed the program a little bit, and I'm going to talk about birds that have been seen only once or twice in the West Kootenays, as far as I know, at least, anyway. It's always possible that, the odd bird's been seen that I didn't hear anything about or didn't get publicized or something like that. So let's get this share screen happening, and hopefully everything works. So you should be able to see my swan now.
Great. Yes.
Okay, good. Let's see if I can figure out how to go full screen. There we go. All right. So what I have done is I've set this up so that the first 15 or 20 birds I'm going to talk about, I'm not sure, I didn't count them, have all only been seen once, to my knowledge, in the West Kootenays. And I'll tell you a little bit about the birds, tell you a little bit about where they were seen, a little bit about where they're supposed to be. This picture is a mute swan. We don't have mute swans native to North America at all, but they have been introduced in a lot of city parks and places like that, and eventually they get away. I know there's lots of them at Stanley Park and other parks like that, and usually they stay put. They stay where they put them. I mean, they clip their wings initially, so they're not going to go anywhere anyway. But feathers grow, feathers regrow, the birds molt eventually and regrow their wings. And a small number of them are now wild in British Columbia. Personally, I'm a little surprised they're not more common than they are. I mean, why do the Lost Lagoon swans decide to stay at Lost Lagoon all the time? I'm not sure. But they seem to. So there aren't very many around. There's only one record for the Kootenays that I know of. It was at Creston. And the details are a little scarce, so I can't tell you a lot about the sighting, but I do know there was one seen at Creston. Next. This is a white-winged dove. White-winged dove has only been seen once. It was seen in Castlegar in June 2006 by Vanessa Johnson. This is not that individual bird. This is a white-winged dove, but it's a picture that I took in Texas. Doesn't belong here at all, really. It's a southern bird. It breeds in the southern U.S., like extreme southern, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, places like that, and of course further south down into Central America. So for a dove to fly from perhaps California or Arizona all the way up to BC, why do they do such a thing? It's hard to explain that. Lots of people have tried to explain why birds make these unscheduled long distance flights, sometimes in the wrong direction, and I'm not sure there's a really satisfactory answer to that question. It's presumed that amongst migrant birds anyway, the ones that routinely make long flights, that if they fly in the wrong direction, that somehow their orientation systems, whatever system they're using, just don't seem to be functioning properly. Some people jokingly refer to them as having a broken compass. But there is no other real explanation for why a bird that's supposed to go south decides to go west one year instead, but it just happens. And why a bird like a white-winged dove that is basically non-migratory, why it decided to fly from Texas to British Columbia, who knows? I mean, there's no real answer. This is a ruby-throated hummingbird. Colors are a little bit off on this one. His head should be green, not black, but sometimes photographs don't come out the way you'd like them to. This has only been seen once in the Kootenays. In fact, very rarely in BC at all on the west side of the Rockies. I didn't look it up, but there are very, very few records for all of British Columbia, except for the Peace River country, because that is east of the Rockies, and that's where this bird belongs. This bird showed up in Trail in 2017, and lots of people came to visit it. This is not, I didn't go down to see it. This is not my photograph. Chris Charlesworth took this picture. But the bird was found by Don and Jen Bergen in Trail. It's a pretty common bird on the other side of the Rocky Mountains. I mean, you don't have to go very far to find these quite regularly. Rufous hummingbird, the common one that we have, generally does not occur on the east side of the Rockies. This is basically the only hummingbird that's regular on the eastern side of the Rockies in Canada. This is not a particularly brilliant picture, but it's the only one I could find of a Costa's hummingbird. This bird showed up in Creston some years ago now, 2008, I think it was, and surprisingly, it showed up in winter. You can see that this hummingbird feeder has been insulated by the homeowner to try and prevent it from freezing. This was a December record. The bird stayed for a while. It was earlier than that. I think it left in December. It showed up in the fall and stayed for a couple of months and left in December. Again, quite a few people visited it, but it was not the easiest bird to photograph. Costa's hummingbird is basically a desert bird. I mean, it belongs in Southern California, Arizona, a tiny bit of New Mexico. It's a southwestern hummingbird, usually found in arid areas, dry areas. So once again, why this hummingbird decided to fly from California to British Columbia, who knows? But it certainly wasn't meant to be here. Far as we don't really know what happened to this bird. It just wasn't there one day. Whether or not it decided to leave or whether it died, which is certainly a possibility. But it's not known exactly what happened to this bird. This is not the best picture, as I mentioned, but that throat is quite deep purple when the sun hits it right. As you probably realize, the coloration on the throat of hummingbirds is not made by pigment. There is no red pigment or purple pigment in those feathers. It's all light refraction. It's just the way light bends and through the feathers. So there's no pigment at all. The feathers are basically black. If you had one in your hand and didn't shine a light on it, the feathers of the throat of all hummingbirds would just be black. All right, changing families a little bit. This is a sharp-tailed center. First record in 2018. It was up here in the cusp. This bird was found by my friend Kat McLean, and she's very good at letting us know when she sees something, and we went right down immediately and found it. Very closely related to the pectoral sandpiper, which is fairly regular here. Very similar in appearance to the pectoral as well. If you're familiar with pectoral sandpiper, it has a slightly more streaky breast than this bird. This bird's got a little bit of streaking on the side of the breast, but the front of the breast is basically just buffy. A pectoral sandpiper is more streaked than this. And the pectoral doesn't have that nice, colorful little cap that this bird has. Sharp-tailed sandpipers are Eurasian species. They don't really belong in North America at all. But a lot of birds, and you'll hear me say this several times, I think, in the next little while, a lot of birds that breed in northern Eurasia, like Siberia, for example, they spill across into the Aleutian Islands and sometimes spill across even into Western Alaska. And once they get into Alaska, it's a fairly easy mistake to make to come straight down through North America instead of going sort of back to Siberia before they fly south. So there's quite a number of birds that have that sort of migration pattern where they breed in northern Eurasia, and that might extend into Alaska. And then we occasionally get those birds drifting down our coast instead of going back. So that's presumably what happened to this sharp-tailed sandpiper. There are records along the coast most years, I would think. But for them to be inland like this he's gone a long way from the coast. The next bird I want to talk about is not actually this bird in the picture. The Pomeranian Jaeger is the one that's only ever been seen in the Kootenays once. This picture happens to be a parasitic Jaeger, which is very similar in appearance, very similar in habitats and behavior. Jaegers are often referred to as the pirates of the sea. They would much rather steal a fish or a clam from a gull than they would go and find their own. They're continually harassing other birds. But typically all of the Jaegers, there's actually a third one. There's one called a long-tailed Jaeger, which is also very rare. And there's only 1 or 2 records of that bird as well in the Kootenays, in the West Kootenay. This parasitic Jaeger, the one that I photographed here, was at Burton, just south of Nakusp here, a couple of years ago. I don't have a picture of a Pomeranian Jaeger to show you. I couldn't really find one either. I suspect there's some on the internet, but I didn't look that hard because this bird will do. Pomeranian Jaeger would look very similar to this. You can see that the long central tail feathers on this bird, the 2 feathers that stick out right down the center. In a Pomeranian Jaeger, they're slightly different shape. Those feathers have a little bit of a sort of a little bulge, a little bulbous spot at the end, which makes that feather a bit wider when you see it. But from this angle on this bird, it would be difficult to separate the two. Pomeranian Jaegers don't belong in the interior. They are coastal birds. They breed all across the Canadian Arctic, but when it's time to go south again, they go straight back to the ocean. So a bird, for example, that may have nested in the Yukon territories will fly across Alaska to get to the Pacific Ocean and then go south. And virtually all of them do that. So to get one of these birds in the interior is unusual. Oh, that's another picture of the parasitic Jaeger. That picture, if you look at the tail feathers on this angle, they are relatively straight and they're slightly pointed. If this was a Pomeranian Jaeger, they wouldn't be pointed. In fact, quite the opposite. They'd be wider at the end than this. These are very rapid flyers, very acrobatic flyers, and they chase gulls and things and steal food, as I mentioned. This is one of the rarest birds that I've found myself. This is another Eurasian bird. This does not belong in North America at all. It's called a little gull, and it's tiny. If this bird were in breeding plumage, it's not. This is in non-breeding plumage. But if it were in breeding plumage, it would look like a Bonaparte's gull. It would have a solid black head, and it wouldn't have those brown stripes in the wings. It would have gray wings like most gulls do. But when I first saw this bird, I thought it was a Bonaparte's gull. I was looking at it through a scope, and it was a fair long distance away, and you don't get any sense of size when you're looking through a scope at distance. And it looked just like a Bonaparte's gull standing on the ground. I only realized my mistake when a Bonaparte's gull walked across behind this bird, and it was twice as big. It was much, much taller than this bird. That's when I realized I had something interesting. It took me quite a while to sort of stalk it, because I knew a bird of this rarity would need some photographs, otherwise nobody's going to believe me. So it took me quite a while to get close enough to get some good photos, but eventually I did. Another oddity that showed up in the cusp a few years ago. This is an ancient murrelet. Murrelets are in the auk family. They're alcids, that whole family, and they are strictly saltwater seabirds. They do not belong in the interior at all. They do breed on coastal islands and rocky islands and things out on the coast, so they do have to come to land to breed, but they do not breed in the interior, nor do they migrate across the interior. And to see a bird like this in the middle of, well, sorry, not the middle of the continent, but many hundreds of kilometers from the water is quite extraordinary. This particular bird showed up in the cusp in 2014, 8 years ago. It was a fascinating bird to watch. They swim rapidly underwater, chasing fish. And this bird, as you can tell from the picture, is very close to us. And there's a little ramp that leads from just down at the marina in the cusp. There's a small wooden ramp that sort of bridges the water and gets from the land to the dock where you moor your boats. And we were standing on that little ramp, and this bird was chasing fish back and forth underneath the ramp. We were watching this thing chasing, and it's remarkable how quickly and how agile they are underwater, and how quickly they can move and maneuver to chase fish. And at that latitude, you know, the high latitude, alpine tundra occurs at 200-300 meters above sea level. So it's a fascinating place to go. It's a long way to go to that area. If ever you're looking for something just a little bit different to do, it's a great place to go. And Smith's longspurs do breed there. And I went there in, can't remember when I went there, 1980s sometime. And we did see some Smith longspurs there. Some of the other amazing or interesting northern species that breed there are things like snow buntings. They breed there. Bohemian waxwings breed there. Redpolls breed there. It's a really fascinating little corner of BC. It's pretty small, easy to explore, but there's absolutely no services or accommodation or anything on the BC section of that highway. But it's a very interesting place. This picture is not brilliant, but I left it in because this is the actual bird. This is a Lucy's warbler.
Oh, that's nice.
This picture was taken at the Selkirk College Trails. This is another one of Craig's finds. If a rare bird's going to show up in the Castlegar area, Craig's going to get it. Nothing gets by him. Lucy's warbler is essentially, you know, a desert warbler. You go to places like Death Valley, California, or Arizona, or places like that to see them. I've seen them in Death Valley, and I've seen them in Texas, and I've seen them in Arizona. But essentially, it inhabits the Sonoran Desert. But this one decided it wanted to go on holiday, I suppose, and it came up to Castlegar. Interestingly enough, there was another one in Kelowna the following year. And I didn't see the one in Castlegar because it was there 1 minute and gone the next and never seen again. But I did see the one in Kelowna, and this is the Kelowna bird. Pretty nondescript. The breeding plumage males have a little tiny bit of color on top of the crown. This bird does not. It's either a juvenile bird or perhaps a female. Pretty difficult to tell. But it's a warbler, typically warblers, a little warbler size. So two in a short period of time in British Columbia, and to the best of my knowledge, those are the only two records that we've ever had in BC. Now, this wonderful picture I stole from the internet, don't tell anybody. This is a Cape May warbler, east of the Rockies, strictly east of the Rockies, boreal forest, all across the northern part of Canada, even into northeastern BC, into the sort of Peace River, Fort Nelson area. little chunk of BC that is east of the Rocky Mountains. We had one here in the cusp. It was discovered on the Christmas bird count by Chris Charlesworth. Charlesworth had come over to help me with the Christmas bird count one year. It was 2006. And he came over and he found it in a backyard. The next day we went searching for it and we got some really terrible photos of it. So I didn't use them. But it stayed for 2 days, or at least we didn't see it again after 2 days. I had no idea where it went after that. It's a lovely little warbler, but certainly doesn't belong here. I mean, even in the wintertime, it doesn't belong anywhere near Canada. By December, when this bird, or early January actually, when this bird showed up in the cusp, it should have been in Panama or Costa Rica or someplace like that by then. Again, not the world's greatest picture, but this is a sagebrush sparrow. This little bird showed up in Lardo. Marlene Johnson found it up in Lardo, and I went over and had a look. As the name suggests, this little sparrow belongs in the sagebrush country. He's pretty regular in the Great Basin Desert of eastern Oregon, southeastern Washington, parts of Idaho. And that desert kind of trickles up into southern BC just a little bit. But this particular bird, even though he's a sagebrush bird, and we do have sagebrush in South Okanagan, he does not come up that far. There are very, very few records for anywhere in BC. And this is the only record for British Columbia. And this one was in 2014. This is another of the eastern birds. This is a summer tanager. Summer tanagers are mostly U.S. birds, mostly in the south. Don't normally come up to Canada at all. Why this one decided to come to New Denver? I didn't see this bird. This is a New Denver bird. Linda Norman found it in New Denver in her backyard and took this photograph. That was in 2015. Yeah, southern U.S. is where this bird should have been in the breeding season, and in the non-breeding season, it would be way down in Central America somewhere. This is not. This is another stolen internet picture. This is another one of those really extraordinary ones. This is a painted bunting. It almost doesn't look real. The colors are just magnificent. It's another one of these southern birds. It belongs in Texas and places like that, and Arizona, and Mexico, and Costa Rica, and Central America. This bird showed up at Johnson's Landing where's my notes here? Sorry, 2007. This one showed up in Johnson's Landing, and Gail Spittler took some wonderful photographs of it. But unfortunately, I don't know where Gail's photographs are. I don't know if any of you know Gail Spittler, but she's in a care home now, and I don't know where her photographs are. But she did have some quite amazing pictures of it coming to her feeder in her backyard at Johnson's Landing. All right, this is the last of the one-time only birds. This is the Baltimore oriole. We have Bullock's orioles in BC. This is another one of those species that previously was thought to be all one. Actually, if you go back far enough, they were two species, and then they made them one species, and then they rechanged their mind and made them two species again. So the Baltimore oriole is east of the Rockies, and the Bullock's oriole is west of the Rockies. And there are very, very few Baltimore oriole records west of the Rocky Mountains. This one showed up in the cusp, and this picture, it was found by Warren and Julia, some friends of mine up here. And this is Warren's photograph. I never got that close to the bird. I did see it a couple of times, but I never got close enough to take a picture like that. I did take a couple of pictures of it skulking around in a leafy tree, and you can see half of the bird here and there. Okay, the next few I'm going to talk about have been seen twice in the province. This is a yellow-billed cuckoo. Actually, strictly speaking, the yellow-billed cuckoo has been seen 3 times in the province. The black-billed cuckoo, which looks quite similar to this, is slightly more rare than that. It's only been seen twice. I put this picture in because I don't have a picture of black-billed cuckoo. There was a yellow-billed cuckoo in Castlegar, the one that most people know about. Sorry, I got to turn to my page here. That was in 1999. It stayed around for a while, long enough to quite a lot of people saw it. Quite a lot of people took pictures of it. I came down, and that was in the pre-digital era, though. So although I think I have some pictures of it, there's slides. This picture is one that I took down south just to illustrate the bird. But the black-billed cuckoo, as I mentioned, is even more rare in BC. There are only 2 black-billed cuckoo records. Sorry, I said BC. I meant West Kootenay. There are only 2 black-billed cuckoo records for BC, and I think they were both in Creston. This is an upland sandpiper. This is another picture, another bird that was found by my friend Kat here in the cusp. This is a bird that you would expect to find on the prairies. It's a prairie bird, basically. Show up in BC occasionally. This is there are only a couple of records for the West Kootenays, and the other ones are quite old. I think Ed had one years ago, and there was one other one in the record someplace that's not very well documented, the other one. And this is the only sort of recent one. The other 2 records, I believe, were both in the 1970s, so it was quite a long time ago. This is the only recent record we have of upland sandpiper in the Kootenays. This is a Hudsonian godwit. This is my picture, but I can't take credit for finding this bird. This is another one that Warren and Julia found. This was taken down at Burton. Godwits are an interesting group of birds. If I can just digress very briefly, one of this bird's closest relatives is called the bar-tailed godwit, and they breed mostly in northern Eurasia, but there is a population in Alaska as well. And it was a bit of a mystery for a long time because bar-tailed godwits would breed in Alaska. They knew fairly well where they wintered. They wintered well south, New Zealand, Australia, places like that. But bar-tailed godwits are almost never seen in migration. And it was a bit of a mystery for the longest while. And 8-10 years ago, don't remember exactly, a group of scientists in Alaska GPS tagged a few bar-tailed godwits before they left the breeding ground in Alaska, so they could figure out where exactly they were going and why was nobody seeing them in migration. And everybody was stunned at what they discovered, because those bar-tailed godwits from Alaska flew to New Zealand non-stop. They did not stop flying for 8.5 days. They didn't eat, they didn't drink, they didn't sleep. They flew for 8.5 days, over 11,000 kilometers from Alaska to New Zealand. Everybody was just blown away that any bird could possibly do that. How could it take on enough fat? How could it store enough fuel to fly for 8.5 days nonstop? But it's quite well known now, and they've done some more research on bar-tailed godwits, and they do this fairly regularly. And the interesting thing is, come springtime, when it's time to go back again, they have a completely different route. They fly from New Zealand to coastal China. So they go across the Pacific or not really quite across the Pacific. They go up to China, and then from there they cross the Pacific to go back to Alaska. So they do the return trip in 2 legs instead of 1. It's a longer route, but they can do it in 2 hops. But it's pretty extraordinary. Looking at now, Hudsonian godwit is also not well known in terms of its migration stopovers. perhaps if anybody ever gets down to doing research on this bird and tagging some of them, they might find that it's a similar situation to the bartail. But it's an Arctic breeder, not particularly common even in the Arctic. But once again, like the bartail godwit, it does breed well south. Sorry, it does winter well south in the southern hemisphere. This is a white rumped sandpiper. This one is an eastern one primarily, or east of the Rockies at least. Pretty rare on the west side of the Rockies. There are a couple of records from Creston. This is Craig's photograph, I think. Better make sure I got that right. Both of the records of white rump sandpiper have been from Creston. Yeah, this is Craig's photo. 2013 in Creston. It looks somewhat similar to our other little sandpipers, like least sandpipers, westerns, and semi-palmated, and things like that. Pretty similar to those, except if you could see it, as soon as he opens his wings, as the name suggests, he's got a big white rump patch there that the others don't have. Arctic terns. Arctic terns fly a long way in migration too, but they don't do it all in one hop. They take their time. It's said that an Arctic tern spends about 7 months out of every year in migration, because they take a leisurely trip from the Arctic where they breed almost to the Antarctic where they winter. They have a very specific diet, and the kinds of things that they eat only occur in cold oceans. So when they finish breeding in the Canadian Arctic, for example, they head over to the North Atlantic, and they cross the North Atlantic because the water's colder on the other side of the Atlantic. So then they go down the coast of Europe and down the coast of Africa, and they get right to the bottom of Africa, and then they sort of spread out along the Antarctic waters because they need to have cooler ocean water to find the food that they prefer. This particular picture was taken in the cusp by my friend Kat. Gray flycatcher, pretty rare in BC at the best of times. There's a small population in the South Okanagan. This is a dry country, sort of ponderosa pine grassland kind of a bird. But there have been a couple of sightings in the last few years. One, the one that most people saw was the one at Sunshine Bay over by Harold Proctor. Quite a few people saw that one. And there was one other one, I think, at Castlegar. I think Craig had one at Castlegar as well. Yeah, this is Craig's Castlegar photograph. The one at Sunshine Bay was sound recorded and was confirmed by its song initially. It's an ash-throated flycatcher. This is a picture that I took down south as well, because I couldn't really find a really good one from up here. A couple of records, like I say, there's an old record from Ainsworth Hot Springs, in the historical records. There was one in 2020 on the Juanita-Elway Road. This is another bird that should be further south of here, but not extreme. It comes in up into Oregon. This is another one of the Eurasian birds that sometimes, as I described earlier, they sort of spill over into Alaska and breed in extreme western Alaska and some of the Aleutian Islands, and then some of them just come down our coast instead of going back. Brambling, there are two records in BC. One was in Edgewood, which is not far from here. And what was the other one? There have been 2 or 3 records in Revelstoke, actually. Not that that's in the West Kootenays, but there have been 2 or 3 in Revelstoke. Oh, there was one in Nelson back in 1992 as well. So that's an older record. This particular photograph is the bird from Revelstoke that was there this past winter. And it spent a good chunk of the winter coming to one feeder in one person's yard. There's another fairly extraordinary one. This is a prothonotary warbler. This is a long way from home, this guy. He basically lives in the eastern half of the US. Comes up as far as southern Canada, like southern Ontario sometimes, but strictly the eastern half of the US. So again, why do they come up here? Who knows? One was seen at Mirror Lake. This picture is not that individual bird. This particular bird was seen in Princeton a few years ago, and the owner of the yard where this picture was taken allowed me to use her picture. It's a lovely little warbler, beautiful bird. It's got these sort of bluey gray wings. This is an internet picture. You can usually tell internet pictures. This is a northern parula, which is also in the warbler family. This is an eastern warbler, so it shouldn't be over on the west side of the Rockies at all. It does occur in Canada in southern Ontario, but mostly it's east of the Rockies and mostly south of Canada. The first record was from Edgewood, and I didn't see that bird. The second record was from Summit Lake near Nakusp, and we did get some rather lousy photographs of it here, but it was enough to verify its identification. I just chose to find a better picture for you so that you could see what the bird looks like. This is a chestnut-sided warbler in non-breeding plumage. Quite a lot of the warblers look very, very different in the winter than they do in the breeding season. Chestnut-sided warbler, as the name suggests, should have a big brown flank streak just underneath the wing there, right down the side. This bird has lost all of that plumage and is now in this sort of drabber plumage. This is another one of Craig's finds at Selkirk College. And that's Craig's picture. Black-throated sparrow is another one of those southwestern U.S. desert birds. I found one of these. I saw one of these in Burton many, many years ago in the 1990s. And there was a second record in Creston just a few years ago. I don't have any details really on the Creston bird. The one I saw at Burton was just hopping around on the rocks beside the road. But as I say, this bird should be in Arizona, Texas, places like that. Okay, we'll probably end on this one. I know we started a bit late, and it's a bit late now. I think I'll finish on this one though. I said these were birds that had only been seen once or twice. Actually, this bird's been seen 3 times, but they were all in a space of a few weeks. Last year, some of you may remember that this is a Dick Sissel, and some of you may remember that one showed up near Nelson that blew it at somebody's feeder last year. Yeah, it was last year. And quite a few people went down and saw it there. And it was obviously a first record for the Kootenays, but very, very few records for BC. It's an extremely rare bird in the province altogether. It belongs, again, in the south. The Great Plains, it spreads up into the prairies a little further north. It's not restricted to the south, but it's basically a prairie bird. So it occurs on the U.S. Great Plains. Does not come up into Canada at all normally. There was one seen at Nelson, as I mentioned, and it stayed for a few days, and quite a lot of people did get to see it. And then just a couple of weeks later, Kat and I were birding in Edgewood, and we had one down there, which we got some photographs of. In fact, this is that bird from Edgewood. And then a few days after that, Warren and Julia found two of them together up here in the Cusp in Browse. never before in the Kootenays. All of a sudden, 3 or 4 birds, perhaps, all in 1 year. The plumages were slightly different. You can see that the black bib on this bird was more pronounced on some of the other birds that were here. We were able to determine by looking at all the photographs that there were a minimum of 3 different birds involved. It is possible that the 4th was a repeat, and that bird may have just simply moved around in the Kootenays. But there were at least 3 and perhaps 4 all of a sudden when normally shouldn't be here at all. All right, I do have a few more pictures, but I think probably 8:45 is, you're probably ready to call it a night. So yeah, so that's the last picture I'm going to show you.
There, I got my microphone. Well, thank you, Gary. Thanks a lot, and appreciate you hanging in there while you dealt with the technical issues.
Yes, I apologize for that. It certainly sort of made the presentation a bit disjointed, but maybe if I had turned my computer off and on right at the very start, we'd have been okay. It's that seemed to work better than just turning the modem off.
If you could unshare your screen for a second, Gary.
Stop screen sharing. I'm trying. Stop that.
Well, it's not crucial. Just wanted to give you a chance to see faces.
There we go.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Gary. That was awesome. Fantastic photographs, even, of course, many of them not lifted from the internet. And the stories that went with them were just terrific. So thank you so much, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, somebody just asked a question on the chat, is how likely is it that these birds might have been escapees? That's a possibility on a couple of them. I would say
the mute swan, maybe.
Well, the mute swan for sure would have escaped from somewhere, but it probably escaped from a park somewhere in BC. So it didn't. I think the one that's most likely to have been a caged bird that somebody had that they lost would be the painted bunting. That's a spectacular looking bird, and if I had the inclination to put a bird in a cage, that might be the kind of bird I would choose. So I think there's a definite chance that one was. I don't think any of the waterfowl or the shorebirds or any of those would have been cage birds. Nobody keeps things like that. I don't think people keep. But the bunting certainly, I would say, is a possibility. Yeah. That'd be the most likely one.
What's the wild colored duck that we got once in Castlegar on the sewage ponds? Very bizarre colors. And
did you have a mandarin duck?
Mandarin.
Yeah. That would have been an escapee for sure.
Yeah.
Almost for sure.
Yeah. A lot of debate about that, but everybody pretty well agreed that it was probably an escapee. Yeah.
I don't think there are any officially countable mandarin duck records in the province. I think they're all considered to have escaped from somewhere.
They just won't count them at all. Eh?
No.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Gary. That was great.
Well, you're most welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
All right, good night.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was
Okay.
enjoyable.
Good night.
Thanks,
Good
Gary.
night, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Gary.
Good night all.